Hi everybody and welcome to today's webinar, which will focus on the Levelling Up agenda and more specifically on the importance of place. My name is John Gray and I'm Vice President of UK Operations, and I'm delighted to be joined today by some of my colleagues who you'll be able to see on screen or joining us from around the UK. First of all, I thought it'd be useful to just take anybody who's new to Emsi Burning Glass through through a little bit of information about the business. You'll see on screen there our vision and mission, with our ambition to be the global authority on the labour market. And our view is that if we pull together insights and data on what's driving the labour market, particularly for organisations in the further higher education and economic development spaces, along with businesses, we can really help you to make better informed decisions about the labour market. So before we get into the main session today, I thought it would be useful just to talk a little about levelling up, particularly for those of you who might be new to this. So the Levelling Up white paper was published in February of this year, and the government defined levelling up around 12 policy missions to be achieved by 2030. And they encompass everything from boosting productivity to spreading opportunities to restoring local pride and local leadership. And it's important to remember that it's not just about levelling up, it's about growth everywhere. So it's about improving every region and then bringing the lower areas up to meet those higher levels. And so whilst at Emsi Burning Glass, we're not going to be able to support you with all those 12 missions. It'd be great if we could, but we're not going to be able to support you with every one of those, but we absolutely can help with several of them. And key to this will be how we help you to illuminate the labour market and skills dimensions of your particular regions. Now, as you'd expect, data is going to be crucial to this. The UK government has set out how they'll transform their approach to data and evaluation to improve local decision making. And to help them achieve this, they plan to create the Spatial Data Unit for England and the Unit for Future Skills. But what is really clear is that sound underpinning data is going to be essential as we consider place-based decision making. So I'm going to introduce my colleagues now. Hopefully you can still see those on screen. And we've got Elena Magrini, who's our Head of Global Research. Elena started with the business a few weeks ago. Will Cookson, Director of Communities and Government, Richard Hewitt, Director for Higher Education, and Ben Owen, who's our Director for Further Education. And we're going to be hearing from those guys in due course. But first, I just wanted to bring in Eleanor, who's going to talk to us about how labour market data can help with some of the levelling up missions. So over to Eleanor.
Thanks, John. I mean, as you said, the Levelling Up white paper covers quite a broad range of topics, all focused on how to improve growth and reduce inequalities in different parts of the country. But there are two specific missions that are really much related to the labour market and skills, where having labour market insights and data can really make a difference. These two missions are, firstly, the one around living standards. The government has said that they want to improve pay, employment and productivity by 2030, ensure that in every place, in every region, there is a globally competitive city, and that the gap between the most prosperous and least prosperous regions will be reduced by 2030. And also they talk about missions around skills, about how to improve the number of people that have high level qualifications, especially in the areas where the number of people with high level skills is the lowest at the moment. And as we talked about these things in previous webinars, we know that these two things are very much linked together, and we need to both improve jobs and improve skills if we want to ensure the success of a place. And therefore, to do all of this, we need the labour market data to understand a little bit more what's the challenge and how we can address it. So I thought I'll use three examples, three ways in which labour market insights can help with this challenge of levelling up. The first one, it's around trying to understand a little bit more the scale of the challenge around levelling up. So in my next slide, what we can see is I mean, on the left-hand side, we see one of the many charts that we can pull up to see what's the difference between different parts of the country and what we need to level up. In this case, employment rate. And as we know, the employment rate varies quite greatly across the country, with the places in the south tending to do a little bit better than places elsewhere in the country. But what we really need to do here is understand the scale of the challenge. Okay, employment rate is higher in some parts than others, but how many jobs do we need to create? How many people do we need to bring to employment? And what is the benchmark? Because obviously the government has said we need to improve these goals, but what is the end goal? And what I've done here is pick 3 places that need to level up, Sheffield City region, Northumberland and Hull, and look at the number of people that would need to be in employment if their employment rate was the same as the national average. And as we can see, the scale of the challenge is quite different in different places. I mean, we're talking more than 37,000 people in Sheffield, approximately 8,000 people in Northumberland, and approximately 1,500 people in Hull. But these numbers first are hugely different, but also the type of challenge in the different places is different. Sheffield has a large number of people that would need to be in employment, but is also a large city with a vibrant labor market where more opportunities can be created. Northumberland instead is a predominantly rural area, so the challenges that this place face are going to be different, and Hull is a different place altogether, so the challenge there will be another one. And so what I've done in my next slide is show how else we can help when it comes to understanding the reasons behind the challenge. Because if we truly want to level up, we really need to understand what are the key challenges that a place is facing that is holding himself back. So here we're talking about Sheffield, one of the places that we were talking about previously. And what we can see is that if we pick the industrial composition of the place, which is one of the many dimensions that we can look at to understand a little bit how the economy is working and how it can be improved, we can see that there are a few sectors in the area that can be considered of strength, in the sense that there are sectors in which Sheffield specialized in, and there are sectors that are growing at the national level. These are in the top right quadrant of this graph. And what we can see instead is that there are also few sectors in areas of risk. So they're quite specialized in Sheffield, but they're not really growing at the national level. So having a lot of jobs in this sector can be a risk for a place like Sheffield. And then we can see instead the jobs in areas in which they're not particular areas of specialization for a place like Sheffield, but they're growing quite a lot nationally. And these are sectors of opportunities, sectors like digital or logistics, civil engineering, and trying to understand all these different sectors and the role they play in a specific area can really make a difference in terms of designing a strategy that helps a place grow, not just in the short term, but also in the longer term, in terms of sustainable growth and productivity over time, and the knock-on effect that these jobs can have also on the local industry in an area, and the kind of more opportunities, more money they bring in, and the more opportunities they can create in an area. So we not just need to understand the scale of the challenge, we also need to get to the reasons behind the challenge so that we can understand the strategies that we need to implement to ensure that a place can level up. And this brings me to my third point, so the next slide. Once a place has a strategy, once we've used the data to understand what kind of policies we need to implement, we also need to monitor change over time. And here we all know that the statistics that are available from publicly available sources might not always be the most timely in understanding the labor market, but we need to closely monitor the situation if we want to understand how things are changing. And that's where things like job posting data can really help, because it can give us a timely, almost real-time picture of what's going on in the labor market. So What we plotted here on the left-hand side is the change in job posting in the last year up to February 2022 for all the different mayoral combined authorities. And this already can give us an idea of which ones have seen the largest growth in job postings and which one instead are a bit lagging behind in that sense. And then we can also zoom in, for example, in a place like Tees Valley, and actually go beyond this headline of just the job postings and how many or what's the volume of these job postings, but trying to understand the occupations and the skills that are required in these job postings. And this is really important if we are trying to track change over time and monitor it quite closely. Firstly, because it can give us an idea of the occupations that are recruiting at the moment, and so it gives an idea about whether these are the occupations that are going to grow in the future, and also the type of skills that are required in these occupations. And matching this data with data around profiles, around the kind of people that are available in an area, can help us understand also the skill dimension of it. Do we have people that are trained to do the jobs that are currently being sought for by employers, or don't we? And how can we address these challenges? So altogether, having all this data can help us not just understand the scale of the challenge for leveling up, but also understanding the challenges and creating strategies to address leveling up, and then monitor change over time. And there's more that we can do with data as well, but I mean, I'll hand you over back to you, John, and then we can talk more about that.
Yeah, that's really useful. Thank you, Eleanor, and really interesting to see the different ways you've presented that data and the challenge that's quite different in different areas of the country. So thank you for that. So you've talked about some really useful data there, particularly around the job postings on this particular slide. Could you just share with us and the audience a little bit how we can help with things like pay and productivity data as well?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, employment is just one of the ways in which we measure leveling up, but government is keen also in improving pay and improving productivity, and all these things are interlinked. So the kind of jobs that are being created will have an effect on pay and will also have an effect on productivity, which in turn will create more jobs and more opportunity of an area. So we can look at this dimension as well, and we can look I mean, when it comes to pay, we have official statistics that can give us a picture of the average pay in different industries and occupations. But we also have in the job posting data, we also have quite a lot of information about the salaries that are currently being advertised, and that can also be a real-time information about how the labor market is changing. And same for productivity, we can monitor that over time, and that can help us understand not just the job that we are creating, but the quality of these jobs as well and their input on the local economy.
Thanks, Anna. So yes, so lots of the rich data there that can complement how we look at those different challenges in different regions. So thank you for that. I'm sure we'll be coming back to you later on, Eleanor, with some questions. So next, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen now for a second, and I'm going to bring in the sector leaders for our discussion. So hopefully everybody can still see our videos on there. So first of all, I'm going to bring Will into the conversation. So Will is our Director of Communities and Government. So Will, can you just tell us, are there any good examples that you're working with customers on at the moment, either using data or considering using data around the challenge of levelling up?
Yeah, sure, John. There are numerous examples, but I don't want to take up all of the time. I think one that's really interesting, and it's interesting because of how it's evolved in that post-pandemic landscape, and is now very much focused on the levelling up agenda, along with the Skills for Jobs agenda, which is obviously running in parallel, is Staffordshire County Council. They've developed a 5-year economic recovery and renewal strategy, along with an economy and skills strategy. And that's been informed heavily by drawing on Emsi Burning Glass labour market information and the insight we can provide. Essentially what they're doing, though, is they want to convene all of the stakeholders around a shared evidence base. And I think that's really important to think about. Is we've got many players within the levelling up agenda. How do we ensure that everyone has a shared understanding of what the starting point is? How do they monitor that over time? And how do we basically work towards shared goals. And we know these timeframes are fairly short. I know it feels like 2030 is a way out. It's not in reality. So yeah, their work's is really evolved, as I said, in that post-pandemic period. Strong focus for them on the opportunities presented in their economy. They focused in on digital technological advancement and adoption, and also that drive towards net zero, which was coming up all the time in our conversations with customers about the potential opportunity there. They're using data from, a mixture of real-time data in terms of job postings, but then also drawing on our structural data. And like I said, I think their particular focus is that they really want to understand digital, green economy, advanced manufacturing, engineering, advanced logistics, the new methods of construction and how those skills are being sought by employers, drawing on our job postings. And then also very mindful of, there's also needs for large volume employment, and that's where health and social care is a priority for them as well. But yeah, I think they've done a really good job, and it comes back to that point I made really, is that they are trying to convene everyone around a shared understanding of where there is high value growth and opportunities for improved productivity for their resident population. Sorry, I could go on, as I said, but that's it in a nutshell. Yeah.
No, that's great. Thank you, Alan. I think so. To mention some really interesting points, and I think one in particular about that shared evidence base that we all know from working with different organisations in different regions. If we're using different data sets and talking about different things, that can be quite challenging. So trying to convene people around that shared data set is an interesting point that I'm sure we'll come back to at some point. So no, thank you for those examples. So next, moving on to the man in your screen, Richard, who is our Director of Higher Education. So Richard, how are kind of our university partners using labour market data to engage around the levelling up agenda?
Yeah, I think what's happening is that rather than just thinking about let's put out more graduates, and we saw it in the last webinar. Duncan explained and showed with the data that just producing more graduates in a place doesn't level up that place. Maybe in aggregate, we can, there is evidence, of course, that is beneficial for people, but just having more high-skilled people does not create more high-skilled jobs in a particular area. So universities are adjusting to that, and the universities we're working with very often use our data to see how their programs can align to the local economic needs. So very often these are institutions that might describe themselves as anchor institutions, civic institutions that engage with this agenda, and it's very much thinking about, okay, well, what is happening in our local economy, measuring it, tracking it. So what are the high skilled jobs? How many are there? What is our alignment to those in terms of our graduates? How many graduates are we putting into that economy, using other data as well, like graduate outcomes data from HESA to understand where their graduates are successfully or not successfully entering local workforces, and pinpointing where the growing demand is likely to be. So universities like Middlesex, Wolverhampton, Huddersfield, Nottingham Trent, University of East London, so all around the country, we can see universities really starting to actually, that's unfair to them to say they're starting to do it. They've been at it quite a while, but really engaging with the data to see how that fits in. But then it's also not just looking at general kind of linkage, but where you have programs and looking at the actual detailed delivery, the pedagogy of what's happening. So you have universities like Aston, where they're really digging down into what skills do they offer within their existing provision, and looking at how the skills demand that those courses kind of intersect within the labour market is changing, and adjusting programs according to that. And then Another kind of change that we're seeing in the sector with the universities we're working with on the data is, traditionally when a university came up with new provision, they would probably start with student demand and capability, and say, okay, we know there's demand from that for X, Y, Z from our peer universities, and we have the ability to deliver that, so let's go ahead and set up programs. Then universities engaging with labour market data and thinking, right, well, how can we better align those programs to the occupations which are in demand, and thinking about the skills. But we are seeing with the levelling up agenda a different approach as well happening, where universities are connecting with their local or regional stakeholders like the local enterprise partnerships and local authorities, and thinking about place, thinking about, well, yes, we can produce graduates, but how can we retain them? How can we retain them in the area? How can we ensure that they're plugging into the economy? And for that, they need to be thinking in industry terms. And so what they're doing is using our data to understand, okay, what are the industries where we have opportunity, a bit like Elena was showing on her slides, and thinking then, okay, well, what are the high skilled, what is the professional employment within those industries, and what are the skills within that which are in demand, and then how do we respond to that? So it's coming at it from a slightly different angle. So we see universities like University of the West of England, Huddersfield engaging with that kind of approach.
That's really interesting take. Thank you, Richard. And I'm sure there's going to be some synergies with as we bring Ben into the conversation as well, and how university space links into the further education space. So just bringing Ben into the conversation. Ben, do you just want to talk us through what's happening in the further education space, and if you can tie that into an example of some good practice as well, that'd be good.
Yeah, certainly. And I think, sort of echoing kind of Will and Richard's points, I'll probably, like I said, there's a lot of synergy between the three sectors, but I think particularly the FE space at the minute, it's kind of impossible to really talk about the levelling up agenda without talking about the Skills for Jobs bill, or Act, as it will shortly become. I think it's just working its way ping-ponging between the Commons and the Lords as it is at the minute. But I think really when you sort of take the two things away from that, it's really about the common skills element of it, and creating sort of higher skilled jobs and then preparing people for that jobs. And actually, I think the FE sector in particular, it has been doing that for a long time, particularly around the T-level agenda, apprenticeship space. But I do think it's very much within FE, and we saw a good example of this last week when we did a webinar with South Staffordshire College. Obviously colleges are using our LMI data quite heavily in planning, because that's been the space really. Ofsted's inspection framework very much is challenging colleges around why they're putting particular courses on. How is it leading to those sort of positive outcomes? And I think the Skills for Jobs paper, if you think that levelling up is the intention of where the government want us to be, the mechanism and vehicle to do that is the Skills for Jobs bill, in all honesty. And so it's interesting to kind of hear what's happening in the sector. There's a lot more collaboration. I think Will mention that. I'm sure Richard will agree with that as well. There's a lot more collaboration, not just within the FE space, but within obviously FE and local government, MCAs, through devolution, and obviously the HE space, because that level 4 and 5 higher technical space where we want to get to really requires lots of partnership. And there's been lots of really good examples of that. Something popped up on my LinkedIn feed yesterday around one of our clients, Preston College, and one of Richard's clients, UCLan, working together, I think for 35 years, and they work really closely together on that level 4 and 5 agenda, particularly around that sort of work-based level 4 and 5 space. But I also think in terms of examples, Sheffield City Region, which Elena already sort of mentioned, is a really good example of how the colleges are pulling together, particularly around that digital agenda. So Barnsley College, have had a really good positive start to their T-level journey, and the Secretary of State came and opened up their new digital centre a few months ago. But they're working really close with a couple of cybersecurity and cyber tech businesses that are housed in their campus. They're sharing that good practice across Sheffield City region. So there's a real aspiration for students to get to that level 3-4 space, and obviously earn that higher salary. So I think from a FE perspective, particularly around obviously our DFE data, which we obviously have put into the system in the last sort of 12 months, which allows colleges to look at that supply and demand and that synergy around what it is that they're doing versus that local skills need, and some of that competitor analysis is really critical, as well as that jobs data and that skills data that Richard's already mentioned for HE. I think that's going to become more and more important. And then the short-term piece of it, I mean, that's very much, some of that is very long-term. You know, T-levels, for example, we won't really see the benefit of those higher skilled entrance into the market for probably 2 or 3, 4 years. The immediate challenge as well is one around adults and adult upskilling, and particularly sort of short, sharp pieces at the minute. So like the SDF fund, for example, colleges again working with will sector in particular around making sure that the offer meets the devolved need, and ultimately is getting adults into, you know, those adults that are in short-term or long-term unemployment into employment again, and sustained employment, and those that are currently in employment that want to make that step up that ladder, making sure that the courses that we offer using our skills data and employer feedback is really helping shape that curriculum and giving those adults that opportunity to progress as well.
Yes, thank you for that, Ben. And yeah, certainly a few questions coming through now from colleagues, which we'll start to touch on some of the things that you've just been talking about, and what Richard, I think, and Will picked up on as well. So thank you for that, guys. Thank you to everybody so far for your input. What I'm going to do now is just jump across to the question panel. If anybody else has questions while we're working our way through this first batch, then please drop them into the question section. First one, I think I'll probably direct to Richard. And the question is, should universities and spaces on courses link to opportunities in the sectors, or have a compulsory link to sectors? So I think there should be there's a missing word in there, but should universities and spaces on courses be linked to opportunities in particular sectors?
Well, there's a loaded question. Should they? Well, look, the economic reality is, you know, ask any economist, you know, if there isn't a job for you in the region you graduated in, then you have the opportunity potentially to go somewhere else. Okay, so and people have the right. It's not like China where you have a hukou and you're meant to work in the region where you're registered. So we don't have that system in the UK. We don't have controlled internal migration, and so I think that's maybe something that isn't quite like maybe isn't a path that we want to go down. However, if we care about place and if we care about levelling up, then it's something that you can influence by having a tie-up between provision and its alignment to the economy. And it's not just about provision either, it's also about things like research and innovation, hugely, because that can be a job creator, which is in the end what we're talking about is we need jobs for these people to go into. So yes, we can align people to the jobs which are there, but also universities can encourage new jobs to be created. But just having the graduates by itself isn't enough. I mean, interestingly, colleagues in Italy were telling me that when new programs are created in Italy, they have to tie them to an occupational outcome. That's the law. So we're not going that route, but I think it's helpful. And also we know from Charlie Bull's work at JISC and Prospects that you know, the majority of students who graduate either stay where in the region they graduated in, or they return to where they're originally from, and very often there's overlap between the two anyway. And so region is important, that alignment is important, but should it be enshrined in some kind of regulation? I'm less sure about that, but there's nothing wrong with trying to influence it and having that civic engagement there.
No, thanks, Richard. And yeah, you're right. It could be a number of different ways you could answer that one. So a similar question, which I'll put this one over to Ben. We often hear about getting people trained to the higher levels of skills and qualifications, but how important is it to get people qualified at the lower levels as well?
I think it's really important, and I think when we talk about, I think we need to not get distracted by sometimes the things that get chucked at us from a strategic perspective. In some areas, getting adults to a level 1 or a level 2, or from a level 1 to a level 2, will be equally as important for leveling up as it will do to get people to a level 4 and a 5 qualification. So if you look at areas, for example, I've worked in places like Grimsby, I've worked in places, you can tell by my accent, I live very near Sheffield. We have areas of like really challenging demographics, and so being able to get adults, off the unemployment ladder or away from that minimum wage job and onto that next level is in many ways as important, if not more important, for that local economy. So, we talk about levelling up and we talk about the sort of great north and south divide, but I do think as well, colleges play a really key role in understanding, that sort of short, sharp, skills-based curriculum. And certainly, if we've got people that have been affected, again, when we talk about levelling up and COVID, and I think there's a question around, sort of the changing in work pattern, and how do we prepare course offerings and making sure that we can look at that from a supply and demand perspective. I think one of the big challenges for the sector, and we're already starting to see this happen and courses develop, is it's not the traditional level 1 or level 2 course. It might be a really short, sharp, skills-based course that gets that person either from a job that they're at risk of losing as a result of external factors into another job. Because we forget sometimes, and I'm sure people that are at risk of redundancy, that's the last thing that they think about, is that if they're in a job, they've got a set of skills, and it's, within our data, we can map the skills in each of those different occupations and help individuals and help colleges and other providers start to scope curriculum that helps to plug that gap. So it's not as scary as coming back to college for a year or 2 years, or coming back to university and restudying a full degree. It might be a series of short, sharp, skills-based curriculum that ultimately gets that person back into that job. So I know the emphasis is very much about high skills, and that's very much where we want to go. But in certain areas, it will be about, like you say, filling some of those gaps. And we saw that with the report that City and Guilds did recently. They surveyed sort of 10,000 working age adults, and there's a real lack of appetite, particularly around those entry jobs in care and food processing, etc., and agriculture. And it's very much about, again, that collaboration around getting people to be excited about working in those frontline jobs and seeing the career progression opportunities. So it won't always be higher technical in every area. That won't be the answer to leveling up in every area. It will sometimes be, like I say, getting people onto that level 2 ladder or that level 3 ladder that gets them into that promotion they've always wanted, or back into the world of work.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Ben. And so there's quite a few questions coming through now as well. We'll probably not get a chance to do them all. I'm going to pick another couple. This one is probably for Eleanor. So will all labour market demand show itself through conventional recruitment channels, so online, for example, or where it does not, how do we best look at those skills and job demands? So thinking about particularly construction.
I mean, that's a really good question. Not every job gets advertised online, and there is a skew in the data towards high-skilled professional jobs, which tend to be the jobs that you do in front of a computer, and therefore you recruit for them online. So there is definitely a danger of missing out some of the jobs. But also we're seeing that the process of putting jobs online has become more common over time, especially during the pandemic, and especially as we try to become more creative about the way we are trying to recruit. So we have a vast number of sources that we get our data from, and that is trying over time to bridge this gap in terms of the skills that are being required. And of course, we don't only look at the job postings, we also look at the profile that different people have, and we can find this information online as well, and that can give us a different picture to answer the similar questions.
Yeah, and it comes back to, again, the fact that there's so many different ways to look at the data and the data sets, and it's working out the best metrics to look at for different locations. So last question. I'm sorry we can't get to them all. What I'll try and do is share these out with the most relevant panel member and get them to come back to you with an answer. So the last one, I think this is probably for Will, but feel free others to jump in as well. So a long-standing issue has been low investment in training and development by employers. Can levelling up be achieved without employer investment in people? So probably anybody could answer that one, but if I just put that one to Will first for a view.
No, it can't. Would be my quick answer if we're really short on time. No, I think it's a really interesting question that probably deserves more than that short answer. There is a real responsibility for employers, and I think lots of employers understand that. Obviously, the size that an employer is a real defining factor there. The smaller the organisation is, the more in investment, whether that's recruiting someone new and training someone, apprenticeships, it's quite a significant burden, and there is a need for the other types of organisations we've been talking about on this webinar to support those employers with that. But no, employers have a real responsibility, and we've seen that with challenges in regards to the emerging tight labour market that came on the back of the pandemic. We saw salaries go up, but it wasn't just about salaries. This is also about the way in which you're going to be treated when you work with that employer, the culture, and what commitment the employer's making to developing the individual within that role. So yeah, there is a responsibility, and I think part of that, as well as being investing in training, is also about investing time and also clearly communicating as an employer what you're about, how you treat your people, and how you work to progress them and get the most from them. So yeah, it can't be ignored would be my short answer.
Thanks, Will. Some really interesting questions today, and yeah, some of those could be webinar topics in their own right in due course. There's lots of other questions come through as well. Somebody suggested that we share those more broadly, so we'll certainly try to do that. So I'm just going to share my screen again now. Hopefully everybody can see that slide. Thank you, Richard. Give it a nod. So thanks to the panel members today. Some really good discussion and insight and points that have been raised. You know, clearly we're just starting to scratch the surface of this. What's going to be a really complex policy as we move through the coming years. As Will said, it's not that long away. But we're here to help you. As you know, whilst the answers are not always straightforward, as we've seen from some of the questions today, this is why we do what we do. We're here to help you to you know, to work out the next steps, to work out how to use the data, and to work out where data can support you in your particular region. We have the data, we have the tools, we have the expertise with the sector leaders to really get into that detail with you for your particular location. So, and to that end, we want to hear from you. We want to speak to customers. You know, reach out to myself or any of the people on the call today, and we can certainly help and support you, and that might fuel discussion topics for future webinars where we can share those thoughts more broadly. So a few things before we finish off. I wanted to take this opportunity today to launch a new product which we've been talking about for a little while now. Andy trailed this one in our last webinar. And the new data dashboards, so this one around curriculum insight. We've also got another one which I'm going to show you shortly on economy insight, and these are a great way to democratize the data, or to get really decision ready data out to your stakeholders in organizations, whether that's an internal stakeholder or an external stakeholder, different ways to share that data. And what I'm going to do now is just bring Ben and Will back in for a few seconds each to talk about firstly the curriculum insight dashboard, and then on to the economy insight. So Ben, are you okay just to tell us a few seconds about this exciting new dashboard launch?
Yeah, thanks, John. And I think, yeah, you've kind of summarised it quite nicely, actually, around democratising data. I think, you know, as long as I've been involved in the sector and using Emsi products, I think clients have always fed back to us to say, as much as they love our analyst platform, could we develop something that's easy to consume, easy to actually take away and gain insight and action on that relatively quickly? And that's what we've done. So we've developed a series of 4 dashboards. Local economy view gives you pretty much what's happening in that local economy in terms of job growth, job decline, sort of top industries, top occupations. And then we've got the 2 supply and demand analysis, where we're pulling in all England DFE data. Unfortunately, it's only available in England currently to our English FE customers, but that allows us to look at a particular region. We've sort of set that LEP level in terms of regional space, so you can have a look at the sort of supply and demand at SSA1 for the totality of all providers, and then the provider data is the individual actual provider themselves. How do they fit into that piece? And then the final sort of piece of the puzzle around our rollout of these dashboards is subject area analysis. So we look at that by SSA1, but we do break that down. So for example, SSA1, we can look at health and social care, public services and childcare, and give you an idea around your market share, where you meet that supply and demand, top skills, top employers, top jobs. So it gives you that actionable data to take straight away, assist in planning, assist with conversations in colleagues in Will sector around skills plans and things like that as well. So it's a very exciting update for us.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Certainly the visualization of the data in the dashboard is going to be really useful for clients in particular sectors. So yeah, Will, if I could just bring you back in for a second to talk us about the Economy Insight dashboard.
Yeah, quick plug in that we will be doing a webinar about this, so please sign up for that when you hear about it. But in short, yeah, it's really exciting. So we've had this planned for a good while, so it's really exciting to be able to launch it. It's the Economy Insight dashboard, specifically designed for local government and other stakeholders that work around the agendas we've been talking about today, around levelling up and skills for jobs. Essentially, the dashboard's been designed to do 3 things: allow organisations to track in real time economic recovery, to be able to benchmark against neighbouring areas, identify priorities, by industry sectors, key occupations, and really then look at how those can be prioritised for investment, for particular interventions to drive growth. I guess it comes back to my point earlier on, is it's designed to provide an evidence base that people can collaborate around, easily understood, and can be used by internal stakeholders and external stakeholders, as you said, John. Yeah, more to follow. Yeah.
Excellent, thanks, Will. So, yeah, if you want to find out a bit more information about those, please reach out to myself or Ben or Will. And we'd be happy to show you the dashboard, and yeah, really easy to use, really insightful data. So final thing is just to mention a few webinars coming up. So this was the first in the next part of a series of webinars, and we've got 3 more to come with particular titles: focus on skills, focus on local partnerships, and focus on reducing disparities. Those are in April, May and June, and there's a link there on the bottom of the slide to our website where you can sign up for those, and we'll share the slides later on so that you can see that link as well. So please join in for the next phases of that, and I'm sure that the thinking, the conversation will really develop in the months in between these. So there'll be some great new information shared on those different webinars. And then finally, we have a webinar coming up with a particular focus around education and training sector. That will be led by Carla Hoff, who's our Director for Sales in the FE market. So again, you can sign up for that one online, and that's on the 12th of April. So that brings us to the end of the proceedings for today. I really hope that everybody who's joined in has enjoyed the session. I think there's been lots of information, lots of good food for thought, and hopefully people who are watching the video back afterwards, as well, as I know many people do now, find this interesting as well. Thanks to our guests who've had some good contributions, and thanks again, and look forward to seeing everybody soon.